Hey everyone, Adrian here. Welcome to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today I'm joined by Kashif Khan. Kashif, thank you so much for being on the show.
Pleasure. Good to be here with you.
Mate, it's such an honor to have you. I was just saying off air, I've been listening to so much of your work over the last, I would say probably more like 12 months or so. And it's just been a really fascinating insight into your life and your discoveries around the DNA sequencing. And I just ordered your book yesterday, actually. So I was listening
Okay.
to a podcast with you and Tom Bilyeu, and you mentioned your book on there, and so I raced out and got it. So I can't wait for that to get in, and I can have a read of that and start to give myself some more knowledge about this fascinating world of DNA and just how much it impacts your world, your environment, how you think, how you feel, how you act. It's such a tremendous leap and bound, I think, in terms of piecing toward that, like, esoteric sciencey sort of background to DNA, but then making it such a easy way to understand it and how it relates to my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think most people don't realize that there is that much that you can glean from your genetics. Meaning most people think it's ancestry. I'm 5% Nigerian, right? Something along those lines. Or it's some rare genetic condition, and you have a 60% chance of getting this genetic disease. The majority of what we go through, whether it's mood issues, should I be on the keto diet or not? Why do I have a friction in this relationship? Why does everybody in my family seem to get diabetes? All of that stuff we haven't used genetics properly for, but it's so implicit. It's like the foundation for all biological processes. So what are we saying? A gene is an instruction that tells your cells how to do their jobs. And you have 22,000 of these instructions. And some of those instructions have spelling mistakes, paragraphs missing, pages missing. So all of a sudden, you don't do the job well, or you do it a little too well. Now, this delicate balance of maintaining this perfection of 50 trillion cells that makes up a human body, start to turn the dials and tweak things a little bit. Hormones, neurochemical production, metabolic pathways, and all of a sudden add the wrong inputs and you don't feel so well, or you feel a little amazing, better than the other person. So that's all we're saying is here's your foundation, here's your hardwiring. It's much simpler to understand than people think. Now you know what choices to make for you that get you the outcome you desire.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. So let's explore that a little bit deeper, because I know on the surface of things, when I start to listen to your work, how I apply it to my life is certain things about, for example, how I feel in times of stress and pressure. So
Mm.
how I react to those certain situations in terms of being, I kind of thrive on meeting a deadline.
Yeah.
And there's certain sort of character traits that, which, well, I think I would have assumed that it's a character trait. It's just the way that I've kind of developed a mindset around being under pressure. But then there's also a part of me that loves to sort of live a little bit on the edge. There's a degree of desire for certainty, but then there's also a large degree of desire for uncertainty. So I like to be entrepreneurial. I like to create new things. I like to sort of live on the edge a little bit in terms of throwing caution to the wind, whereas most people may find that very uncomfortable. So to me, I'm just like, that's just the way Adrian is. Adrian's just risk taker.
And now the big question that comes up is it nature or nurture, right? People say, well, based on your experiences, you evolved and developed certain skills. So it's a little bit of both. What it is there's an innate hardwiring where we know what neurochemicals drive different behaviors, how you perceive the world, how you feel, anxiety, burnout, addiction, all of these things. We know what genes drive each neurochemical, the way you make it, the way you bind it, so meaning the intensity of that feeling, how quickly you clear it, so how long did that feeling last? And all of a sudden, you can start to map out someone's behavioral profile with a very high degree of certainty. Like, I don't need to meet you to understand who you are if I have your DNA.
Mhm.
And then you do know if this person is more entrepreneurial or if they're more risk adverse, if they bind trauma, if they are meant for more of a leadership role or more of a dependable mid-level management role. These things are hardwired. Now, there is some truth to the nurture part, which is you've been given a gift of, and if I were to guess with you, this reward seeking behavior, as we call it, I'm entrepreneurial, I need risk, is usually rooted in the DRD2 gene, which determines how efficiently you bind dopamine. And some people don't do that so well, which means that it's very difficult to get satisfied. So you seek more and more and more. Then there's a gene called COMT, which actually clears your neurochemicals. So how long did it last? And if it doesn't last long enough, you're also not getting satisfied. So that leads to reward seeking behavior. I like whatever I did isn't good enough, and I need another bigger and badder version tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that one pathway, you've channeled it. Now you add this. So that was the nature part. The nurture part is because of whatever your circumstances are, you've channeled it into entrepreneurialism. Some people may have channeled it into addiction, the exact same pathway, because I can't get no satisfaction. Could mean seeking achievement. It could also mean seeking something that creates pleasure, because both pleasure and reward equal satisfaction. You only need one, you don't need both, right? It could also lead to depression, because if you don't seek pleasure and you don't seek reward, your baseline is the world sucks. Nothing is good enough because you just can't experience satisfaction to the degree of your peers around you with your hard wiring. So you've been given this gift. It is designed to give you what you're doing, become entrepreneurial, lead the pack, and go build things. But put that in the wrong context, and all of a sudden you start to use words like addiction, anxiety, burnout, because that's not what you were designed for. So it's very important. In fact, when we deal with people clinically, the first place we always start is their executive function, how they think, because it's very hard to heal everything else if they don't know how they perceive what's even being said.
So true. I think what you said just then resembles a lot of my earlier life. So in terms of being into fitness as a youngster, it's some of those things that I would just go like dive balls deep into a particular subject or a topic of health or nutrition, or I'd just be in the gym flat out. So just be like an all or nothing type of
Yeah.
approach to things. And again, that has had its moments where it's led into types of addiction. And I think at times where I've been persuaded by maybe the going wrongs of the world or things not working out in my life and things like that, then I would look to something to seek attention in order to satisfy that
Yeah.
curiosity or that kind of hole that I feel like is missing. So a large part of my life now is learning to be still or learning to slow down and
Yeah.
learning to just sort of almost be happy being bored in a sense. Is that, I don't know if that makes sense
No,
to you.
it's true. And many people go through this. The entrepreneurial journey is pretty consistent. If you talk to people, right, and how they got to where they are. And by the way, there isn't one entrepreneur profile. We are talking about one particular one, this reward seeking behavior. There's other reasons why people become entrepreneurial too, but let's focus on this one, right? And in this journey, the difference that happens when you reach a certain age, typically around 40, is you find a sense of purpose, right? So you've been through it all. This reward seeking behavior causes you to think so fast and do so much and take on so many burdens that you never find your purpose until one day it hits you in the face.
Mm.
And when it hits you in the face, it allows you to slow down, ignore all that noise, and hyper focus. And now you channel your reward in one direction, as opposed to that looks good, like the squirrel effect, like everything is a shiny object, right? So and this is where it's not only genetics, right? It's also understanding the inputs of environment, nutrition, lifestyle. These are the three inputs that triangulate around your genetics to equal your outcome. But if you don't first understand the innate central wiring, here's who I am, you don't know when it comes to environment, nutrition, lifestyle, what choices for me. So for you, for example, it is very important to create that focus and structure, and eliminate the noise, because you'll easily get distracted and move on to the next thing. Give yourself that sense of purpose and whatever the priority is, so that you're getting reward from that and you can keep going down that singular path.
Mm.
So, when we've learned these things as we work with executives, athletes, celebrities, etc., and now we're able to sort of teach it back.
Interesting. Where does the gene code for optimism or pessimism, is there such a correlation between the two?
There's a couple different reasons. So here's another sort of misnomer. Single genes don't have single meanings.
Sure.
There's a lot of interpretation required. And what genetics does is it tries to figure out what does this gene do? And it becomes up with a singular meaning. And then all of a sudden somebody else says, well, I have that version of the gene, but I don't feel like what you're describing. There's some interpretation required. And that's what we did differently is I realized coming from outside of the industry, I'm not a scientist, not a clinician. I was a guy that was sick that used genetics to heal myself. And I realized that these guys, I talked to 5 different PhDs and they told me 5 different things. So they're interpreting it. How do we interpret better? More data. So I set up a study where I spent 3 years serving 7,000 patients, one by one by one, anecdotally fixing their problem. Did not finish until we got to the root of their problem. Then we learned something, put the insight in the bucket. Then you start to see people fit in the same bucket, and there's a trend, there's a profile to these genes. So it's not a singular gene, it's 3, 4, 5 genes that equal together this avatar or this profile. So if you think of positive and negative, there's a couple things that will get you there. There's a gene called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Its primary purpose, again, the genetics, is how efficiently do you produce new neural pathways, neuroplasticity. So the physical hardware of your brain, can you keep it young for longer? Can you recover from concussion? The actual physical substance of the brain, right? So that's the genetic and sort of pharma meaning. We also know it dramatically affects your mood. If your BDNF levels are low, things mean a lot. Right? There's a lot of meaning to things, which means it's very easy to be risk adverse and see the problems, which outwardly to people around you looks like you're negative. When really what you are is that filter that a guy like you needs sitting next to you, right? To tell you, okay, this looks good, but this one, let's just think twice, right? That's one example. There's also your adrenaline response, which I'm guessing yours is also dysregulated based on how you describe yourself, which means you're in that adrenaline response. How efficiently are you binding the emotional input? So almost everybody can bind the intellect, which is car accident, God forbid, I remember it was bad news. But the next time I'm on that street or I see a similar color car or a car jerks while I'm in it, do I get that same feeling again? Trauma. Some people do. Some people literally imprint and bind that feeling, that trauma, through this adrenaline pathway. And so they pick up as if they just finished the last scenario, even if it was 10 years ago. And that's where you get this friction. We're like, not this again. And somebody else is like, what? This, I don't even know what you're talking about. That was 5 years ago, right? Because the feeling is elicited and comes right back. So this is another person who may see the problems and everything, especially if it is a repeat of something they've experienced before. Now, the person that is very efficient in this pathway doesn't bind the trauma, doesn't bind the emotion. And if they're very quick to clear their neurochemicals, they also remember very little about the problem. So that problem person is probably going to get screwed over and over again by the same people because they forgive and forget, but they appear to be very positive. So the outward symptom is just like disease. When we talk about diabetes, cardiovascular disease, these are the very last stage of something that started 10, 15 years ago. And same thing when you describe someone's personality, this is the very last step in a complex neurochemical pathway that you could have predicted much easier. So now, again, what outcome am I seeking? Now I know how to get there based on how I'm wired.
Yeah, wow. So when you talk about trauma and you talk about something that is, I guess, stored on a cellular level, right? So an experience or an emotion or some people might call it a trigger. How much of that plays into the influence on your genetics, or does it not have any influence? Like, does the genetics influence the emotion or the trauma, or does the trauma then have an influence on the genetics? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what we're saying about genetics is how do you experience the moment? To what level of intensity? How long did that moment last? And how do you remember it? Those things are foundational. They're genetic. So the neurochemical processes that allow you to experience anything, the intensity, the duration, and the recall are genetically driven. Now, depending on the intensity of whatever you're dealing with, it can affect your epigenetic expression, which means here's my baseline gene. I have, the bad version of the adrenaline response. So I imprint trauma, right? Put that person in a 3-year battle and war, right? Their epigenetic expression is going to turn the dial aggressively. So what is epigenetics? Your genetics is you have version B of the gene. So this is how you do the job. Epigenetics is because of what you ate, because of what you breathe, because you saw a tiger running towards you, your genes turn on or they turn off, right?
Right.
And why does that happen? Because your body is designed to be resilient. So when you do see that tiger, right, a cave person walking out, all of a sudden, all the right neurochemicals start firing that allow them to survive. Fight, run, strength, resilience, right? That's epigenetic expression. So there's both things are happening. There's your foundational hard wiring, and then there's your body responding to whatever the input is, whether it's something you ate, whether it's something somebody said, whether it's a change in temperature. Your body is constantly responding with epigenetic expression. And some of those, again, when it's chronic in nature, when it's ongoing, your body starts to think, this is something I need to permanently deal with. And there's a very famous study about the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. This is a really famous epigenetic study where they still today, the grandparents of Holocaust survivors are still overexpressing certain genes when it comes to trauma. And that's why there's this sort of caricature of neuroticism amongst, sort of American Jews that are the grandchildren of these survivors, right?
Mhm.
Why? Because the epigenetics are still turned on. They inherited this ability because their body is trying to protect them from what their grandparents went through, right? So that it's a little
Wow.
bit of both.
Wow. So, in saying that, then like the origins of your DNA would have to have a profound impact on how that blueprint is formatted and how you would react or retaliate in certain circumstances and events, right? So, and like you're from Canada, right? From Toronto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Canada, America, Australia, like we're kind of fairly big melting pots of a lot of different nationalities. Okay. So
Yep.
my mum is a native Australian. Her descendants are from England. Okay. So, I mean, she was born in Australia. My dad was born in Italy. So I would have a mixture of different sort of origins of DNA. So,
Yep.
when you speak to things like that, you might say, well, that's fine. Your descendants are from this particular part of the world. And in that environment, it was, I don't know, super hot or extra cold, or there was a war going on at that time. In
Yeah.
my case, for example, there would be like two different gene codes that would, or genetic expressions. I don't know how to term the wording of it. In my kids, for example, so like their mum is Macedonian. I'm half
Okay.
Italian and half Australian. So they would have like a combination of different genes. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way it works is mom has a gene code, dad has a gene code, and they each have most genes. There's nothing to look at. There's some functional genes where there's variance possible. And when there's a variant possible, it's usually one of three options. Let's call it slow, medium, fast version of the gene, right? So now mom has slow, dad has fast. So kid could get any combination of that because you get two copies. You get mom's copy and dad's copy creates you.
Mm.
So you might have got the fast version and the slow version and the slow version. It's a genetic lottery what you're going to get, one from there and one from there. There's some genes where it's possible to have what's called a copy number variation, and I would argue that you probably have a few of these given the Italian background. Uh, if it's especially if it was a Southern or Northern Italian, do you know?
Love them.
Southern?
Yep.
Yeah, so Southern Italian definitely likely some copy number variations, and what that means is there's genes entirely missing. Forget about what version or a spelling mistake, just not there, right?
Wow.
And they're some of the most important detoxification genes. And why is this happening? Because that ancestry didn't need it, right? And Southern Italians, at some point, I don't know the date, mixed with people from India. So that Sicilian area, right? And there's almost zero of this detox capacity for that region. So yes, certainly we are in a new reality where our DNA, as it stands, is about 250,000 years old. So if you think of what humanity is, we've been the same for about that time. Our genes have not changed. It's just been this lottery of getting mom's version, dad's version. The same versions keep passing on, right? So our current reality of this melting pot and industrialization and globalization is what, a couple hundred years old, right? And really only 50 years, like 1950s plus is when it
Mhm.
really kicked in, right? Prior to that, it was existing. But go back 200 years, you lived where you came from, right? There was very little other than the United States of this mass like multicultural assimilation type thing going on. This is fairly novel. And so you're wired for your ancestral habits. And all of a sudden you don't live there anymore. You don't breathe that air. You don't hear those frequency of the water or the leaves, and your water is truly different. The food is different. This is why there's so much disease in a country we call the United States that has the biggest healthcare budget in the world per capita. The
Wow.
EU, I think the average is $5,000 to $6,000 per capita, per person per capita. In the US, it's 12,000, more than double. First of all, the food is disgusting. The
Mm.
chemicals are disgusting. There's more things making people sick,
Mm.
but there's also this disjointed hardwiring not designed for where people live, and it's creating all this illness.
Yeah. So with that being said, because if you've got this situation where we've got different predispositions to certain genetic imprints, or your mum's copy, your dad's copy, those sorts of things, then there's obviously the environment at the time that I'm guessing that the genes were created, I guess, and there's the lineage of all of that. But now we've got these environmental factors. Like, I've got two little sisters. They're 12 and 14. And I sent her, my elder sister, one of your videos about how many chemicals she puts on her face every time she puts her
Mm.
makeup on. And so I think the number was like 170 or something like that. It was a preposterous amount of chemicals that you were putting on your face at any one time just by applying makeup. And so
Yep.
a large part of my lifestyle, in especially in the last couple of years, I think the this last 2020 pandemic experience has kind of like really added a quite a quickening to people's awareness around just what's going in and out of their bodies, what's in the environment. So can we talk to that a little bit? Because there's just so many things that are altering, I feel, altering our DNA and making it very hard to kind of, it's almost like you're just putting layers and layers of dust and soot and dirt and grime and everything. And it's just sort of dumbing down that photocopy of cells to the point where, there's a lot of things that are happening that are just making us fat, sick, and stupid. Like there's just so much
Yeah.
of that going on at the moment. It seems like there needs to be almost a regression in the things that we eat and the things that we
Yeah.
consume on a regular basis. So let's talk to that a little bit.
And you're seeing people realizing that and demanding it now, right? So you've had 144,000 chemicals added to humanity since the 1970s. And the majority of that is for food processing, preservatives, colorings, etc. Right?
Wow.
So those things didn't exist. That's why when grandma said, "Well, I used to eat bread and I was fine," we're not talking about the same thing, right? Glyphosates became prolific around 2005. It started being used everywhere. Now all of a sudden everyone's caught on. And so they're saying, okay, we'll get rid of it, but they're just replacing it with something else called, I think it's called chloride. There's paraquats in the food. So there's this industrialization of food in order to make it cheap, in order to make it last long on the shelf, and in order to make it addictive. It's about the capitalism versus the health. So when the purpose of food was put aside and the capitalistic priorities become the priorities, this is what happens to food. It becomes a racket, is what it is, right? I can tell you a giant list of foods from the US that other countries have banned the import from. And I know you're in Australia, So as a simple example, Australians won't import certain American cereals like Frosted Flakes, mini wheats, which you can find in Australia, but they have to be made locally because there's a chemical called BHT, which is a known carcinogen that's used. There's in the breads, there's a chemical called potassium bromate, which is what you make foams out of. Like yoga mats are made out of potassium bromate. And so EU, even China won't import American bread. You know, the hormones that are used in US dairy, China has banned the import now of those foods. You know, it's really funny because China says that pork is a national security issue for them, right?
Wow.
And they said we have to have pork supply figured out as a national security issue. So in order to supply the kind of pork they need, they have to adopt practices that are illegal in China. Chemicals, disposal. The biggest one is the disposal of manure. What do they do about all that? But the things that they want to do are perfectly legal in the US. So they went and bought up all the American pork farms to supply themselves because they don't mind doing that nonsense in the US, where they
Wow.
literally the manure and the chemicals that are used and the feed and all the stuff that they don't allow in their own country, they're doing there. So the biggest hog company in the world is in which is American is now owned by a Chinese corporation to supply China in made in the US, right? So a lot of this has to do with the FDA's lack of oversight. They've given like there's a famous interview online where this senator from I think from California is interviewing the president and director of the FDA, who was I forgot her name, lady at the time a few years ago, and she kept asking her like, so tell us about baby products. Are they regulated? She's like, no. Tell us about shampoos. No. Tell us if a dangerous chemical is found in a soap that's used on babies, is the FDA responsible to do anything? No. And every answer was like, no, 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 no. Basically, we don't do this anymore.
Mm.
You know, we now are 75% funded by pharma companies, which is the actual number. And that's what we do. We do what our customer, the pharma company, wants us to do, which is approve drugs, right? So, so this is what's happened. And that American problem has now been exported, right? This ease of keeping it on the shelf, you know, the tasty food that becomes addictive.
Mm.
Other corporations around the world are learning that. That's just one problem. Then we can talk about chemicals. Then we can talk about EMF and an electronic frequency that's making us sick. Then we can talk about hormone disruption and what's in the water. You know, this we can spend literally a whole day just going through all this stuff. The threats are far beyond our genetic capacity to cope with. And our genetic capacity was wired for an ancestry of a cave person. Yes, we have detox systems. Yes, we have anti-inflammatory systems. But if you look at the innate biology, they were not designed for this current load, right? It's like you have a Ferrari and you're trying to go off road in the mud and race it. It's gonna fall apart pretty quick.
Mm.
It was not designed for that reality. So that's what's happening with everybody right now.
Wow. So, in terms of your work with respect to DNA, like, where are you finding the biggest breakthroughs in the modification of your environment? Because that's what you're talking about, right? Is like,
Yeah.
how do you modify your environment to be conducive to be the best version of your gene expression? So, like, not all of us can just move to certain parts of the world that are sunnier, that have got fresher water and all those sorts of things. Where are you finding the biggest breakthroughs in terms of determining what you would need versus what I would need?
So there's two parts there. The first part is where we're having the biggest impact
Yeah.
is everything around female hormone health. That's the area that needs the most support because all of what we're describing, toxins, inflammation, that's one layer to it. In women, it's also hormone disruption. The same threat that for you and me may cause a little bit of inflammation. For a woman, it's a question between her ability to have a baby or not. How crazy is her menopause or not? How horrible is her menstrual cycle or not, right? So the endocrine disruption, the estrogen mimics that these chemicals and plastics also induce is making women really sick. All the anxiety and weight gain, et cetera, it's all rooted in this stuff. So that's the area where I would say the impact is the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, you know, where's that direct sort of gene expression or management tool that keeps popping up? Um, I would say it's this concept of moving away from understanding health as a response to symptoms and knowing that it's all about maintaining the health of the cell, everything that we look at ultimately comes back to the same central hub. How healthy are your cells? If your cells are thriving, nothing matters. You're not aging, well, at least slowly. You're not getting a chronic disease. Of the top 15 killers, I can speak at least to American data, 14 of them, of the top 15 reasons people die, are all rooted in inflammation. So if you don't have inflammation, you cannot have the top 14 diseases. It's just not possible. The cells have to first be in a state where disease can set in. You're constantly fighting cancer, you're constantly fighting diabetes and metabolic core dysfunction. And you reach this level where the threat goes beyond the threshold of your resilience. And this is why people don't get sick at 25 for the most part. It's like 50 plus, because your mitochondria start to deplete, so the cells are less resilient. The cumulative effect of 5-6 decades adds up and it becomes too much, right? The cells are already somewhat aging, hormones are coming down a little bit, so you're less resilient. So that disease, it's this like line, and finally disease wins, right? So it's knowing that we can talk about all these different things, diet, nutrition, fitness, hormones, etc. It all comes down to how healthy is the cell. If there's no inflammation, you're not getting sick and you're aging very slow. One last thing I'll say, I said 14 of the 15 top killers. The other one, which is not 14, the 15, which is actually, by the way, the number 3 cause of death in the United States, is medical error.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, doctors making mistakes by giving you medicine that kills you. That's the number 3 cause of death in the United States, and they're trying to ban supplements.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
Yeah, that's just crazy. So, Kashif, what I like to talk to is actually, I'll just bring up another point. When you say that women, you're having the biggest breakthroughs with women, have you ever seen a documentary called The Disappearing Male?
No, but that makes perfect sense to me.
it's it's interesting because everything that you've mentioned on this podcast and in other podcasts and is relating to men becoming more feminized. And so it's everything in the water. You mentioned all the toxins in our soil, things like that, the plastics, all those PUFAs, all those sorts of things that are, those forever chemicals that are sitting in our body. But it seems to have a very detrimental effect on men, on how they develop in terms of whether they get man boobs or whether they get lower back fat or those sorts of things, extra weight around the belly, even to the point where it's affected their testis size, their penis size, like how they metabolize hormones, all those sorts of things. So it's becoming to the extent and I think the overarching theme was obviously our testosterone levels are almost like, if we were to use the same unit of measurement or the same barometer that we had, say, 50 years ago, men today would be sterile because they're just their testosterone levels are so low. You obviously
the
agree.
exact same threat. The difference is in women, we're seeing health symptoms, fibromyalgia, endometriosis, because a woman is already, so whether you're a man or a woman, it's the same hormone cascade. Progesterone converts to testosterone, converts to estrogen. Women have a 28-day cycle, men have a daily cycle. We do the same thing every day, right? So now in that cascade, the assumption is that women just net out far more estrogen, which is why they're estrogenized and they're female. Men net out far more testosterone. So, but in that, we all do this variably. There are some men that are more estrogen dominant. There are some women that are more androgen dominant. So there are some women that, for example, have smaller breasts, smaller hips, but they can burn fat really quick. They're more androgenized, more testosterone. So there's a variability there. But for the most part, men are androgenized, women are estrogenized. So in the woman, all these estrogen mimics, all these chemicals are estrogen mimics. Their body thinks they're estrogen and treats them as such. You're taking a woman who's already estrogenized and then over estrogenizing her, which leads to all these diseases: endometriosis, fibromyalgia, crazy menopause, dementia, cardiovascular diseases as you age. In a man, it's kind of like I'm androgenized and you're bringing that down, right? The estrogen mimics are bringing me down to this level. Now, depending how bad it is, where I truly become estrogen dominant and the physical traits, and like you said, the gynomastia, the man boobs, etc.,
Mhm.
right? Or are you teetering on something in between? The data is now showing that based on this, the consistent trend that we've seen over the last decade or so, where sperm counts are dropping by 1% a year, that we will have no male fertility by 2045. Now, keep in mind, this is based on 1% a year. This year, it was 2.64%.
Yeah.
So that
Wow.
2045 may come a lot sooner. And it's no surprise that you have companies in Europe that are building womb factories. There's companies in Israel that are making stem cell babies, so you no longer need an egg and a sperm. So the science knows what's coming, and instead of fixing the root cause, which was everything in our environment is like killing us hormonally, it's like, no, we're just going to make your babies in a factory. It's
Wow.
it's already on that path. Yeah.
Kashif, can I ask you, how much of this do you think is coordinated and planned to the degree that it is a direct attack on, for example, men being feminized and not being masculine or strong or able
Yeah.
to protect anymore, and women not being barren to the degree that they cannot have children anymore? Do you think that there is, I know it sounds conspiratorial, and there's been a lot of that going on the last couple of years, but do you think that there is evidence to suggest that this is a coordinated attack on humanity as a whole to kind of dumb down, reduce the population? Do you think that there's any truth to any of that?
I think there's 100% a coordinated effort, but I don't think it's an attack on humanity. What it is it's a shift in what it means to be human. So right
Mhm.
now, we think that we are sovereign, right? That we have whatever we have, we are God's children, let's say, right? Whatever you want to call it. And we have a government that we pay for to maintain our states, our nations. Where the shift is going is if we can break up the family and remove unity and manufacture people, then everybody's directly sort of related to the state as opposed to their family. They're loyal to the state as opposed to their tribe or whatever, right? That and the reason why I say this openly is because what I know, these guys know, right? There's no surprise that sperm counts are crashing. You can Google it and see it, right? And there's no surprise of what's going on with hormones. So the root cause of all this is known. It's also no coincidence that the womb factories are being built when we know there's a different way to fix this problem. It's also no surprise that, you know, God and families and sort of genders under attack, right? So if you take all those pieces and put them together and you think about power and what happens when people are in power and want power, seems like a perfect playbook,
Sure
right?
does.
And when you talk, when you meet these people, which I have, and you have a logical conversation about a solution that's otherwise, deaf ears, no interest.
Hmm.
I can go meet with the health minister in Canada. I've met with health ministers here, where I live in Canada. Wow, that's amazing. Doesn't go anywhere because they don't want the solution. It's not, the higher ups already have a plan.
Yeah.
So sounds conspiratorial, but put someone in front of me that has a decision to make, that has the ability to make a decision otherwise, and why do they never make that decision?
Good point.
Right?
Hmm. Okay, let's circle back to a healthy cell. Some of the things that I've been implementing over the last couple of years, and particularly in the last 12 months, is really minimizing a lot of the foods that I eat to the degree that I think there's kind of like I'm putting the best money together in terms of what's the best bang for buck, what is the best nutrient rich, nutrient dense foods that I could eat on a regular basis, and then stick to those. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at cleaning my body. So whether it be through enemas, whether it be through fasting, whether it be through cleansing of juicing and all that kind of stuff. So they're the things that I'm really geeking out on and experimenting with my body. But there's other things that I'm really curious to know, particularly discovering your work about and your book, which I'm going to sink my teeth into soon, the DNA way. So I want to get your take on restoring a cell back to that place where you said before it's not in an inflammatory response, in a constant inflammatory response, which is the root of all disease. Have you ever been into like Tom Cowan's work about like disease don't really exist, it's just all inflammation and terrain theory and all those sorts of things? So I'm
Yeah.
kind of like leaning towards that I guess sphere of information, in terms of really starting to adapt my life and lifestyle around all of that. But I'd love to hear more about your work, about your DNA company, and the things that you're doing to restore cellular function and bringing people back to life, essentially.
Yeah, so I think personalization is key. Like the first thing to realize is that, well, everyone's experienced this. Listen to a podcast, watch a YouTube video, read a book. It's like, I'm gonna go do this.
Mm.
And wait a second, it didn't work. Right? Or it just worked incredible. And why did that person make that podcast, make that video, write that book? Because whatever they did probably changed their life. It's true. But ask them the 5, 6, 7, 10 year story prior to that thing they found, and find out about all the trial and error, all the one size fits all that just didn't work until they finally found that thing. So what I'm saying is that if you use your genetic map, you can skip all that and you can filter to directly what the priority is. It's not about a prescription like you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's. That's what people think genetics is. And that's what it still is in academia. But what it really is if you find that propensity towards dementia, a fellow Australian, by the way, Chris Hemsworth, he was on this show called Limitless,
Mm-hmm.
and a doctor told him, and this is a perfect example to answer your question. A doctor told him that he has a certain version of the ApoE gene, which means he has an 8 to 10 times elevated risk of dementia. Another version of that gene means you have a 17 to 25 times elevated risk. So he was in the middle. So the next steps were like, well, you got to start preparing, you got to think about it. Da, da, da. What is it? I just gave that guy intense anxiety for the next 40 years. You have an 8 to 10 times, like the anxiety itself will probably cause the dementia. That what I believe is genetics is the starting point to functional genomics. Genetics is priority, not prescription. Priority. Dementia is the thing I have to work on. Now, what does that gene do? The ApoE gene, it transports lipids around your body. It moves cholesterol around your body. So if you have the bad version, you don't efficiently transport cholesterol, which means that if you're sending cholesterol to your brain, it's more likely to develop plaque, which then leads to that cognitive decline. So the question should be, why was cholesterol sent to my brain if I don't transport it efficiently? Because of inflammation. Your body uses cholesterol as a tool to fight inflammation, which is why people get plaque buildup in their arteries as well. It's not a heart disease, it's an inflammation of the artery disease from what you're breathing and what you're eating and your stress levels and lack of sleep, right? So now we know triggers inflammation. So then what would cause inflammation? Is it because I don't have the best gut detox genes? Is it because the things that I breathe get past my first line of defense because I don't have those genes operating that well? Is it because my oxidation, my internal ability to deal with oxidants isn't that well? And there's many more we can talk about. If I go down that functional pathway and I find the job that my body just doesn't do, for a woman, it may be that she makes toxic hormones, right? You make estrogen, but you convert it into metabolites before you have your cycle. Some of them are toxic. And then on top of it, you add the birth control pill and frying pans that are hormone disruptors. So you start to map out, here's me, here's my source of inflammation. That's why my brain would get inflamed. And that's why finally that gene would have to kick in to transport lipids, and it doesn't do that good of a job. But if I never had the inflammation to begin with, I don't need to worry about how bad that gene is. It's more of a disease response, and all research that's funded, by pharma is disease centric.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about health. It's about masking and fighting disease. So they only start the research here. in the disease state. What is this gene related? What is it doing? Oh, plaque buildup. There's the Alzheimer's gene, right? So now you name a condition, you can think of it to this degree. What's the hardware failure? As for example, the amyloid plaque, and what would cause the inflammation in that location that leads to the disease? Whether it's neurological, whether it's mood, whether it's gut issues, whether it's cardiovascular, all of these can be laid out in this way, and then you can reverse. I can't tell you how many hundreds of people we've taken off of pills, or you can prevent, but you can see what's coming in the future and adopt the right habits, knowing that there's certain biological functions in your body that just aren't right, and so you have to take a detour and use something other tools, and that it's really that simple once you get down to it.
Wow. So can you, before I let you go, can you walk me through the process of getting, so if I wanted to get my DNA tested, what's the process that I have to go through in order to do that? And then can you also maybe talk to what I would get from you as a response? It's not like ancestry.com. It just says, you're part Scandinavian and you're part, Jewish or something like that. It's obviously giving me something that is
Yeah.
like the results of this genome sequence, or this genetic sequence that you have, this gene imprint or blueprint that you have. This is what you should do. Is that kind of how it works? Can you step me through that?
So I realized that what people really need is ease of use. That's another thing that was missing in genetics. Go get a genetic test and be given 500 pages of data and like, here you go. What do you do with that? Right. And most doctors you take it to don't even know what it means. So what was needed was interpretation. I don't need 500 pages of data. I need to be told, here's what's wrong. Here's how you fix it. It should be that simple and easy. So we broke it down to 6 core systems, which if you resolve those, you're in optimal health. This is where most problems come from. Those systems are mood and behavior, everything about the brain and how you think and feel and perceive. Diet and nutrition, how do you metabolize fats, vegan foods, vitamins, etc. Sleep, there's different sleep disruption from not falling asleep properly to not staying asleep, and the genetics of all those cycles. Hormones, whether you're a man or a woman, this is fitness, libido, hair, skin, you know, fertility. There's so many things that come out of hormones, energy, sleep, even. Then there's chronic disease and aging. So, like we just talked about Alzheimer's, let's talk about more examples like that, right? Then innate cellular health. What is it that would cause my cells to age faster, which leads to all these other problems, right? So detox pathways, anti-inflammatory pathways, antioxidative pathways, those are all been mapped out. You can read, you'll open the report, you'll go to mood and behavior, and you'll see the word anxiety, a word that you understand, and you'll click on it, and you'll see why you experience anxiety, because it's not the same reason for everybody. There's different reasons, right? And you'll be told, if you feel like this, here's a supplement you should take. Here's something you should remove from your house. Here's something you need to do in your relationships, because these are the triggers, right? So we built it like that, and now all 6 of those get reinterpreted for the context of longevity. There's a 7th report, which is really a combination of all the previous 6, reinterpreted to how do I add 2 decades to my life? What are the things I need to look up? Because it's not only about living longer, but you need to have a healthy brain, healthy bones, healthy skin, no inflammation. And this is why there's so much dementia, by the way. First of all, there's a lot of triggers, but it's also because we're just living longer. So our brains are around for longer, and we haven't learned the maintenance plan, right? We haven't learned that, okay, we used to die at 35, now we die at 78, but we have not done anything to maintain our brain health so that it'll last that long,
Hmm.
right? And that this is the
Interesting.
big gap. But you do see people live to 120, and I truly believe that if you look at the physical structure of DNA in your cells, they look like they're designed to last 120 years. That's truly what it looks like. There's these caps on the end of your DNA that are called telomeres. They're like bumpers that absorb damage, that protect your DNA. And the physical structure of them is designed to last 120 years. This is what we're wired for. But our habits take years away. The things we do chip away at that 120 and bring us down to Western averages about late 70s,
Mhm.
right?
Well, Okay. Where do people go to find out more about your information, about where they can get their test done and all those sorts of things?
So there's two places. My company is called the DNAcompany.com. But when speaking with an audience like this, who, you know, probably has stronger motivations than, I don't know why I can't gain weight, but there's a bag of Doritos on my belly while I'm watching TV. You know, there's some people that want to dive deeper into coaching and programs and like, hey, let's walk me through this and let's add 20 years to my life. So you can go to my personal website, Cash Khan, so KASHKHAN official.com, which is also my Instagram handle where you can learn a lot. So go to my personal website. You can also buy a test there, but there you can send me an email and learn how to dive deeper. If you want sessions or program, I might not be the right person. I might tell you need a naturopath or doctor, which we have. We have a team of 19 clinicians that do different things. But there's some people where, for example, an athlete that wants to be their best, or an executive that wants to be their best, or someone who's stuck in a weight loss journey that just hits a plateau. I can help those people a lot. We've done a lot of that. So yeah, that's where you go. The DNAcompany.com. You can learn about the science. You can order a test there. You can go to my personal website, cashconofficial.com. You can order a test there, learn about coaching. And I'm happy to help with whatever you need.
Brilliant. Kashif, thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I love all your work. I want to commend you on the fact that like people may not know, or if they research you, they will, that this is not your expertise. This is not your field. You're sort of like a business guy. And I think the leap that you've taken to go from that environment to here is tremendous. And I like how you're bringing it to, I guess, the common folk, so we can learn and we can educate ourselves on how to be a better version of ourselves. So I think it's just brilliant work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, man. Thank you.